This is an introduction to Macbeth via Act 1, Scene 1, the scene with the witches on the heath. So what we're going to do is look at this scene both from a close reading point of view and also how you would use that for commenting on the rest of the play and starting to analyse how it establishes its ideas, themes and concerns. So if we look at this scene, the whole scene is actually on this slide. So it's a very, very short opening. And if we work our way through these points, first of all, in the top right, where you can see I've just drawn that arrow, it's a very short opening and it begins kind of in medias res. So that's a phrase that means the action begins halfway through an existing conversation or an existing scene. You get the impression that this is the end of a much longer meeting and that you're coming in at the conclusion of something. So immediately, the kind of note to make or the point to take is that the audience has missed something. The audience isn't aware of all of the facts, all of the plans. There's a reference to fog later, and we share that confusion at this point. Technical word to take away is exposition. That's that process of the writer of a text establishing character, setting and theme at the beginning or opening of that text. And you can just see in brackets underneath I put a very quick recap of the terms that relate to the narrative arc or sometimes the tragic arc, any kind of development of a storyline. Exposition is that opening. There needs to be a complication. There's then a rising action leading to a climax and a resolution. So at the beginning, we're looking to have the ideas introduced for us. And here you can see that the ideas that Shakespeare is introducing begin over this side. So we start with thunder and lightning. Okay, before the witches speak, we have this kind of natural disruption. Ironically, in Shakespearean stagecraft, the idea of thunder being generated by a cannonball being rolled around implicitly kind of aligns this scene with battle and conflict on a number of different levels anyway. But you have this idea of pathetic fallacy here. So this is both a scene of natural and supernatural disturbance. Okay, you have the witches who are planning something, the witches who are a force that is dangerous and unpredictable and uncontrolled. But you also have nature at the height of that elemental disturbance. There is a very powerful force going on in the background. And the question that the first witch asks, when shall we three meet again, in thunder, lightning, or in rain, kind of makes it clear initially that this is a process that has some degree of inevitability about it. It's not if we'll meet again, it's when shall we meet. And the prerequisites, the things that have to happen, prerequisites, okay, the things that are needed for that meeting will be either thunder, lightning, or rain. So they are, again, kind of aligned, and you spell aligned like that. They are aligned, they are lined up with that idea of chaos. What they're doing is implicitly disturbing the natural order of things. So they are aligned with chaos. The second witch replies, when the hurly-burly's done, when the battle's lost and won. And if you look at that anaphora, so that's that technique of repeating the same word or words at the start of successive lines or clauses. You've got that when. It's got that idea of inevitability about it. This isn't a conditional, this isn't an if. This is a kind of certainty. So they're going to meet when the hurly-burly's done, and hurly-burly is kind of chaos, disorder, commotion, tumult. And it says, there currently is hurly-burly. Things are, for it to finish, it has to exist. So the things are currently in a state of confusion. And then she goes on to say, when the battle's lost and won. Okay, and that is paradoxical. A paradox means that you've got something that on first sight doesn't seem to make sense, but when you unpick it, there is an underlying kind of logic to it, there's an underlying meaning to it. And in this case, it's showing that there are two sides to everything. You know, this is a world of ambiguity. You can't take things at face value. Things mean more than one thing. You need more information, you need more context. That's going to be important when it comes to Macbeth interpreting what the witches are saying. He jumps to conclusions about their meaning to suit him rather than to actually listen to what they're saying when he goes to get the second set of prophecies. So the battle being lost and won, for one side to win the battle, the other side has to lose it. This is also a battle that's going to have kind of different implications. You know, the victory here, the triumph of Duncan's side, the triumph of Macbeth within that battle is ultimately going to lead to the death of Duncan. So there are all sorts of things being fought for at this moment. Just noticed before we go any further, I was going to say something about the witches. You can see this note here. I put female, danger of female power, a corrupting and a malign femininity. This is a play where femininity is viewed as a bad thing, okay, and power to female characters is kind of subversive. So if something subverts, it kind of undermines, it turns over. You have the witches and you have Lady Macbeth, obviously, and they are seeming to have a kind of, you know, corrupting influence on this patriarchal world. I'll say more about the witches and their femininity over the page, but just to be aware of what they represent visually as well as symbolically. They are a challenge to masculine order. You get the third witch saying they'll meet again at the set of sun. So the idea of the sun going down, foreboding darkness, and this idea that it's imminent. These things are going to happen very soon and can't be stopped. There's an inevitability of it. Fits in with the idea of free will and fate. It aligns the witches with darkness. Okay, where the place upon the heath, they are meeting in an area which is barren and wild, not civilised, not domesticated. And then you'll notice that up to now there has been a very strong kind of pattern for the lines. It's actually written in something called Trochaic Tetrameter. So tetrameter, 8 beats. It's written in trochees, so that's giving you an idea of the meter, the stress pattern. And you've also got these rhyming couplets, so at the end of each line, let's just put there rhyming couplets, giving you a very regular, a very kind of mystical, magical effect. It's almost like an incantation. So an incantation is like a spell. Okay, so you're getting the idea from the language that this is something magical, mysterious, ceremonial, almost in a dark, magical way. So at this point where we get there to meet with Macbeth, if you try reading it out loud, you can see that there's a metrical disturbance on that line. And it's the first time that Macbeth has been mentioned. And he interrupts things, he messes things up. Macbeth is a disruptor. Then with the mention of Macbeth, things change. They start to leave. Okay, so Macbeth, his significance is heralded in terms of structurally, linguistically, and in terms of the dramatic action. Macbeth's mentioned, they start to go. Grey Malkin is a cat, Paddock is a toad, and non means, you know, immediately come, yes, you know, let's go. So these would be familiars, so witches having animals with them that were helping them kind of use their power. And then they all together chant fair is foul and foul is fair. That idea of confusion and equivocation. If you're equivocal about something, you're blurring meanings, you're disrupting definition. You know, things that are beautiful are awful. Awfulness is beautiful. Again, Lady Macbeth, but Macbeth himself, this idea of appearance and reality is going to become mixed up. Good and bad become kind of untrustworthy or interchangeable on appearance. And hover through the fog, again, another weather source of confusion symbolically, and filthy air. Air no longer being the kind of life-giving, life-sustaining element, it's now poisonous and toxic. So there's quite a lot in that first scene. What do you take from it? I'd probably make sure you've got a note that this scene establishes the play set against a backdrop of ambiguity, instability, and equivocation. Okay, so you've got problems with meaning, problems with things not being in balance, problems with definitions and borderlines. You might want the word liminal. Okay, liminal means on a boundary. Okay, kind of like on that threshold. This scene is kind of on the threshold between reality and kind of the supernatural. You have a confusion. You have the theme of the introduction of appearance and reality. There, you can't trust things. You have a warning implicitly about the dangers of female power, the subversion to the patriarchal authority that it could be said to represent. You have the introduction of the idea that this is a world where where magic and the supernatural exist and are to be taken seriously. And I would link that into the Jacobean idea of magic as a reality. You know, you've got all that context of James I and his actions against witchcraft and his actions to kind of rid the kingdom of witchcraft at great human cost. You've got Macbeth as a disruptor, and you set that against the Jacobean desire for order and fear of chaos. Think about the great chain of being, or the Elizabethan chain of being, that idea to classify and keep things in a hierarchy. Macbeth is kind of disrupting that. You've got the equivocation of the battle being lost and won, and the questions being implicitly posed that, you know, what is victory? For whom is this a victory? Who is going to win? Who is going to lose? What does this battle signify? And just finally, I'd make sure that you're comfortable with the terms exposition. I'd make sure you can use incantation, as long as I spell it correctly. I think I just went on for too long spelling that word. And then I've just put there the archetypal or archetype, if you add that extra E and you get rid of the AL to turn it into the noun. An archetype is the kind of prime example of, the model one of. Okay, so these are archetypal or have become archetypal witches. But as such, there's some interesting arguments about the representation of femininity they show, and the idea that everything witches do kind of takes what they should be doing in terms of domestic stuff and turns it on its head to make it dangerous, even down to there's a very good article in Neil Bowen's book, The Art of Drama, Macbeth, GCSE and Beyond, that mentions the fact that witches flying around on broomsticks, they're meant to be using them for cleaning, for goodness sake. But you have got that idea of subverting domestic expectations of women. Hopefully that will be useful. If you're preparing on a question or you're preparing revision notes or at the start of the text, I'd keep running notes on these ideas and themes so you can make sure that you're consolidating what you're doing. Annotated texts are great as a first pass through, but in order to be able to write about texts, ideas, characters, themes, structure with any complexity and sophistication, then you really need that idea of kind of grouping things together so you can track development through the play. I hope this helps. Bye now.